Hey, you cool cats and kittens. It's Miss Yabut here. Wow, great work, scholars, yesterday on making sure that we were finishing all the parts of our assignments. I loved hearing your reflections on the Holocaust. Before we get into our historical fiction text for today, the harmonica, a couple of announcements. First, make sure that if you haven't already this morning, you log into Lexia for 30 minutes. By tomorrow, you have to have 150 minutes at least. Otherwise, that is a zero. This is a requirement as part of our work for ELA. Scholars, also remember that we have office hours today from 2:45 to 4 o'clock, and that is 3 Vista virtual points. I know that so many of you want to make sure that we get as many points as possible before the end of the day tomorrow, so make sure that you attend. Scholars, today we are going to continue reading historical fiction. Yesterday, we read an infotext article called The Holocaust that helped build our schema for today's story, The Harmonica. While we are reading historical fiction text, scholars, remember, we should always be asking ourselves these essential questions. First, I want to ask myself, how is this setting important to the plot of the story? Remember that yesterday we learned about the Holocaust. Can you remind me, what was the Holocaust? Right. It was a terrible event that happened during World War II in Europe during the 1940s. So the time and place that this story will take place is very important to the plot of our story. Next, I always want to ask myself, what can these historical fiction stories teach me about the past? We read yesterday that the Holocaust was a horrible time. What can I, as a reader, learn about that time? Finally, especially today, we are going to be focusing on how do readers distinguish fact from fiction while reading historical fiction. First, let's review what historical fiction is. I know you guys are experts right now, but remember that we can always find our resource by going to our historical fiction under resources and classwork. Say it with me, scholars. Historical fiction is an imaginative story that takes place in the historical past and may have some real events or people. My turn, one more time. Historical fiction is an imaginative story that takes place in the historical past and may have some real events or people. Your turn. Historical fiction is an great work, scholars. ELA masters, remember that historical fiction is still make believe. It comes from the author's imagination. It is narrative fiction. Historical fiction is what? Is it narrative or infotext? Tell me. Yes, you all are such experts by now. This is a narrative text. Let's go ahead and add that to our Google form. What kind of text is historical fiction? Narrative or make-believe. If you need to, pause your video to select that now. ELA masters, let's review some of our characteristics for historical fiction. Remember that you can find those in our resource. You have about 45 seconds to answer this next question. Which of the following are characteristics of historical fiction? Select all that apply. Get ready and go. 10 more seconds, scholars. Great job. Let's review. Remember that our first characteristic, and probably most important characteristic of historical fiction, is that the setting is important. We know that historical fiction takes place in the historical past during a real time. And yesterday, we learned about the Holocaust, which is again occurred during a time and place that was real. So if you selected this second answer choice, give me a high five. Good. Our second characteristic of historical fiction is that it is often focused on real issues of the time and different characters' perspectives of them. So, yesterday we read about the Holocaust, and we read about this horrible event in which millions of people, mostly Jewish people, were killed because one leader of Germany named Hitler had a perspective of them that was they were less than human and they didn't deserve to live. It is very important that we're remembering those different characters' perspectives as we are reading our historical fiction text, the Harmonica, today. What do the different characters think or feel about the Holocaust and what is happening? Scholars, if you selected this third answer choice, it is often focused on real issues of a time in history. Go ahead and pat your back. Nice work, friends. Our final characteristic of historical fiction is that some values, perspectives, and living conditions are different from today. ELA Masters, this couldn't be more true when it comes to what happened during the Holocaust. This is widely considered to be one of the worst events in history. And now, in 2020, people are actively pursuing peace and making sure that something like the Holocaust never happens again. So, ELA Masters, those values that Hitler and the Nazis have are certainly very different from today. Germany, for example, is considered a peaceful nation that is doing well. And so are many other nations in Europe that we read about yesterday. Let's check out our Google form. If you selected our third answer choice, show me a yes. Good. We know, friends, that historical fiction is not a nonfiction text. Yesterday, we did read a nonfiction text, the Holocaust, to help build our schema, but today's text that we'll be reading today is historical fiction. While the setting was a real time and place, the characters and what happens in the story are from the author's imagination. Today, we are reading a fiction text. Make sure that you do not select this first one and that you have these answer choices here. Good. Can you remind me, what genre of text are we reading today? You've got it. We are not reading an info text article today that has real facts. We are reading a historical fiction text. It is narrative and make-believe. If you need to, go ahead and pause your video to select that now. Good. ELA Masters, can you remind me, why did we read an info text article yesterday about the Holocaust? Yes, if you said that it builds our schema, go ahead and kiss your brain. Right. We would not understand today's story if we didn't first understand what happened during this terrible time. We read the Holocaust to build our schema about the time, the place, and important people and events that we might hear about in the Harmonica, which is our historical fiction text today. So we need to make sure that as good readers, sometimes we read info text to help build our schema. Scholars, one thing that I need to remember that while I'm reading my historical fiction text today, I need to ask myself, how do I, as a good reader, distinguish fact from fiction while reading historical fiction? ELA Masters, when we read The Bracelet a couple days ago, this was a little tricky for some of us. Let's review how we do that. As good readers, I have to ask myself, is the time, place, important people, or important events real things from history? Do they include any of these facts that I learned about yesterday in my info text article? If so, these are all facts. These are all right. Let's write that in our Google form. These are facts. They did happen in real life. Then, as a good reader, I need to ask myself, which parts of the story are coming from the author's imagination? In The Bracelet, Emmy and her family were not real characters. They were made up and come from the author's imagination. So even though they were experiencing the Japanese internment camps, and those experiences were the same experiences that real people had, their experiences are not real. That is fiction. Similarly, in the Harmonica, the boy who we'll be reading about today may be experiencing things that Jews or Jewish people experienced during the Holocaust, but his experiences come from the author's imagination. So I have to ask myself, if this particular statement is talking about the boy's thoughts or feelings, then I know that that must be fiction. It's coming from the author's imagination. Again, I have to ask myself, which parts of the story are coming from the author's imagination that have to do with some characters whom I know are make-believe? These are fiction. ELA Masters, if you need to, pause your video to double check our answer choices. Good. Scholars, yesterday I asked you to think about what we learned about the Holocaust. The Holocaust was a terrible time during World War II when Hitler tried to get rid of all the Jewish people in Europe by killing them in concentration camps. This was our main idea of the text yesterday. Again, this terrible event, the Holocaust, happened in Europe. We live in North America here, and the Holocaust happened in Europe. The leader of the Nazis, Hitler, was the leader of Germany, which is where the Nazis were based of. But we know that they also invaded other countries like Poland and France. Yesterday, I asked you that the fiction text we're going to read tomorrow, the Harmonica, is about a Jewish boy who lives in Poland, so this country here, in 1939. Based on what you know about this time period, what do you predict might happen in this story? Some of us had some really smart ideas. One scholar said, I predicted there will be a boy and he had a harmonica and he loved to sing with it. I love that this scholar was really thinking about their schema about what a harmonica is, which is like a little instrument. Interesting. This scholar said, I predict that it is about a boy who hides from the Nazis. I know because the boy is Jewish and the Nazis killed Jews. This scholar was really using his or her schema from the article that we read yesterday. I predict that the Jewish boy will be sent to a concentration camp and his family will be killed by Nazis. I think this because during 1939, Jewish people who lived in Poland were being sent to concentration camps and being killed. ELA Masters. As I mentioned yesterday, a lot of what we might read today could be tough to understand or process our feelings about. I know that I have my historical journal or historical fiction journal ready, just in case I want to ask myself and think to myself, wow, what must this character have been thinking or feeling during this time? As we read the Harmonica Today, scholars, remember to think about the difference between fact and fiction and make sure that you double check your answers before moving on.